Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to you, wherever you are in the world. I am Tigress Osborn. I'm the Executive Director of NAAFA, the National Association to Advance Fat Acceptance. Happy Fat Liberation Month to all of you. We celebrate Fat Liberation Month in August as a time when we can pay special attention to the kind of work that we do all year, educating folks to change perceptions of fat, celebrating fat people who are doing badass things out in the world despite the stereotypes and stigma that we face, and advocating for the rights of fat people. We've had some tremendous programming already this month, and you can always find things that you've missed on our YouTube channel, which is NAAFA Official. We've also got lots more events coming up this month, and you can find out more about those under the Fat Liberation Month page on our website at NAAFA.org. Our guests today are Shilo George and Isabella Carr, and I will introduce you to them in just a moment. I also want to introduce you to our interpreters today from Pro Bono ASL. Today we have Selena and David with us. Please be sure to check out the really important accessibility work that Pro Bono ASL does. You can find them on their website at probonoasl.com. And just a note, you may think that they are here today for free because of their name. Their name speaks to the really important work that they do for things like funerals and protests and other community events that don't have budgets. We do compensate our interpreters and we compensate our guests, and we are able to do that through the generous contributions of people like you. So if you like what we're doing, if you support the work that we are doing, please give if you can, and you can do that on the giving page of our website as well, naafa.org/give. Okay, so let's meet Shilo and Isabella. Just a reminder, before we get into the really important information that Shilo and Isabella are going to share with us today, please be aware, like, this information is presented to you as education, as an opportunity for you to think through some of the things that you need, as community-centered advice. It does not constitute legal or medical advice, and it is not a substitute for consulting with your own legal counsel or medical advisors for your specific situation. Now, let me tell you about these two powerhouses that we have with us today. Shilo George, they, is a force to be reckoned with in the realm of body sovereignty and healthcare navigation. As a Southern Cheyenne, Arapaho, and Irish-Scottish trailblazer, Shilo brings a unique blend of cultural wisdom, resilience, and humor to her work. With an unwavering commitment to empowering individuals, she's on a mission to revolutionize how people navigate healthcare systems and claim their rightful power. Known for her fierce dedication to dismantling weight stigma in medical spaces, Shilo is the visionary behind Shilo George's Playbook for Power. This dynamic document empowers patients to advocate for themselves, challenge biases, and demand the respect they deserve. With a bold and unapologetic approach, she equips individuals with the tools to navigate healthcare confidently, unafraid to challenge oppressive systems. Beyond her groundbreaking work with body sovereignty, Shilo's brilliance extends to trauma-informed practices and anti-racist work within organizations and government systems. Her training and presentations on systemic oppression, Native American history and culture, and white supremacy within professional culture have garnered her accolades from audiences worldwide. With over 2 decades of experience as a social worker and a Master of Science in Educational Leadership and Policy, Shilo's expertise is deeply rooted in the welfare of communities of color. Their educational background, combined with their native cultural and spiritual practices, gives them a holistic understanding of the effects of trauma on individuals and communities. Shilo is a trailblazing educator, a tireless advocate for justice, and an unshakable pillar of support for those she serves. Her mission is clear: to foster healing, liberation, and equity in all the spaces she touches. Prepare to be inspired and challenged as you witness Shilo George in action. Following Shilo, you will meet Isabella Carr. Isabella, she, her, is a writer, theologian, and death worker, specializing in end-of-life care, education, and advocacy for deviant bodies. Isabella is currently a graduate student at Harvard Divinity School and recently completed her internship with Death Doula LA as part of her field education. Her doula and research focus is a material and theological project entitled Death Fat, Fat Funerals and Futurities, which was selected for presentation at the 2023 American Academy of Religious Conference. As a doula, Isabella focuses on education and advocacy, as well as providing direct and compassionate care to fat people. Isabella is originally from Portland, Oregon, and serves clients in the Northeast, Northwest, and Los Angeles area. She graduated from the University of Southern California with a degree in religion and wrote her honors thesis on fat sexuality and spirituality. She has spent much of her professional career working with marginalized communities and is dedicated to accessibility and autonomy. We will put information in the chat about how you can find Isabella and Shilo in other places after today. But with no further ado, let me turn things over to Shilo.
Well, hi, hello, everyone. I just want to say, if you want a really amazing intro, use one of the AIs. I have Simon, also known as ChatGPT, that I kind of work with and helping of writing. So when you saw me sort of laughing, that was not written by me. It was written by Simon. So it's kind of an interesting experience. But anyways,
I just want to say that Simon said all the things that we've always heard about Shilo. And all of those words like legend and iconic and trailblazing, or if those words weren't in there, Simon should have said them. But the trailblazing part is really important. And everybody who has experienced Shilo's work, who I know, believes all of those things. So there's no need to be humble in the face of Simon's explanations.
Thank you so much. It's sometimes interesting with bios when you hear people read about you and you're just like, oh gosh. But yes, thank you, Tigress, for helping me own that and be sitting with that. So I'm really excited to be here with all of you today. And thank you so much for being with us, navigating this conversation. And thank you for the interpreters for being here as well. I'm super grateful for that. If anybody needs me to slow down or anything like that, let me know. I get excited and then I start talking faster. So just give me a heads up if that's an issue. So let me, I'm going to time myself to make sure I stay on time because I, want to make sure that, we have plenty of time to get through our information today. I'm going to share my screen. I just have a few slides for today. So I do longer sessions on body sovereignty. Some of you may have already heard me talk before about this. One of the things that I really, that's really helped me with body sovereignty is finding people who look like me, who are fat, who are disabled, who are queer, who are indigenous, if possible, many of those different things together, and really thinking about if I can't find those images, how can I make them for myself? So this is a picture someone took of me, and then I made it into my own digital art. So anyways, just wanted to kind of point that out, that visuals have been really helpful for my own sovereignty and understanding me and what sovereignty means to me. That's through a gaze that's my own gaze, Gaze, my own gaze and reflection, or that of a camera and things like that. So yeah, just want to point that out. So a few things just about me. I mean, you heard from my bio, but I just want to make sure I'm clear about being Cheyenne and Arapaho as well as Scottish and Irish. I understand that I'm very light-skinned. And so when I talk about race, I want to be very clear that it's oftentimes that people don't see my indigeneity physically in me. And that can hurt to have that erasure, which does come from colonization. However, it's not the same as Black or brown folks and what they experience in life and day to day. So I just want to be really clear about that. I identify as two-spirit and indigenous queer or indigiqueer. Two-spirit and queerness are two separate things. So I just want to be clear about that. I am disabled. Both, I have some learning disabilities. I'm neurodivergent, and I have mobility disabilities as well. I am in eating disorder recovery. So that's an aspect of my story as well. And healing from that eating disorder is also part of body sovereignty. I'm a trauma survivor from my childhood, and that's really impacted body sovereignty and my body sovereignty and what that looks like for me. I'm also a proud auntie. I don't have my own children, but there are many children around me, and I take it very seriously being an auntie. So that's a little bit about me. Um, if you're interested in hearing more from me, my best friend Brianna has similar identities to me. We're both Indigenous, fat, queer, two-spirit, and disabled. And we have our own podcast. So we talk about indigeneity and other aspects of being Indigenous and queer and two-spirit, and navigating the world as disabled people. So check out our podcast if you want. Your two-spirit aunties. So growing up, I had a body that was sort of labeled as fat when I wasn't. So on the far left of the screen, that's me in kindergarten. So cute. And it would have been the late 70s, early 80s. You can tell by my clothing. And the center photograph is me at the age of 10. And this is when my parents started putting me on diets. I don't think I'm fat in this picture. I think I'm a 10-year-old whose body is preparing for going through puberty. But this is when I was put on diets. So I just kind of wanted to give an idea of kind of what I looked like. And this has also helped me to go back in photographs from my childhood and sort of figure out like what was I feeling at the time, what was being told to me about my body, what was I taking in, and then what was actually real based on photographs and things like that. And so the last picture on the right is me in high school when I was given a knockoff Nordic track for Christmas. And it was really hurtful to get a piece of exercise equipment. And so just kind of thinking about, as I was growing up, being abused, and then also no one really addressing that abuse, but then really focusing a lot on my body size and, dieting to prevent being fat later on in life, which didn't work for me. And it doesn't really work for anyone. So that's sort of the way I grew up. A lot of dieting culture, really hating my body, not being happy with it ever, and having the sort of like impact of abuse on my body as well. And the things that come with that, like disassociation, and not feeling safe in my body either. So I'm 47 and I dieted all the way through my teenage years, adolescence, so 10, all the way through my teenage years, into my 20s, off and on in my 20s. And then in my mid 30s, I found fat community. And it really has helped me reframe how I feel about myself. But it's taken a lot of work. I mean, it's a ton of work. It's ongoing work to try to reframe and rewire our brains from diet culture, from ableism, from racism, and all of those other systems, right? It's always ongoing work. So the gift of body sovereignty came, I think it was about 5 summers ago. I had finished graduate school and I really just felt horrible about myself. I didn't have a great graduate school experience and was really mental health wise not doing good. Um, Maybe I had a nervous breakdown in graduate school. I don't really know what to call it. But there was a summer 5 years ago where I just didn't want to continue to be here. And I just had tried so many things to help with my mental health. I felt like no one's going to hire me. No one cares about the work I do. People just see me as a negative. I see myself that way. And I just didn't see any way forward. And my ancestors, my Cheyenne ancestors in particular, came to me and we had a conversation for a while. And they said, you can do whatever you want to with your life and the choices you make. We'll love you any choices that you make, right? But we really feel like there's a lot for you to do in your life, and there's a lot of healing available to you. And I was like, what? I've tried medication, I've tried therapy, I've been to ceremony, like I'm not seeing it. And so what came out of that conversation was I needed from them a reassurance that they would be my collaborators for the rest of my life. And they said yes. I think they've always been collaborators my whole life, but I just needed that we've got you, Shilo. And so from that point on, I have worked with my ancestors on something that I call my body sovereignty project. And this body sovereignty project, these are some of my Cheyenne ancestors, some of my grandmothers. The little girl is my great grandmother, and she was about 4 years old in this photo. And then her mom is to the who you see, the woman on the right, and then her grandmother is on the left. Yeah, so I just wanted to show you kind of a picture of us together. So, what does body sovereignty mean to me? I think that's really important. And this evolves as I move through my body sovereignty project and learn more about myself and continue to reframe and heal and feel liberation. So, my body's sacred because Creator said it is, right? So these are not based on white supremacy. This is based in Cheyenne understanding of life. So I'm choosing to see and frame this in a very completely different perspective. My body is a gift from Creator and is thousands of prayers of my ancestors. Right? My ancestors are my life collaborators and fully support my healing, whatever that looks like, fully support my choices, whatever that looks like. I have a sovereign right to my body and I have a sacred right and responsibility to my body and to my connection and all the choices about my body, right? Creator gave me that sovereign right. It has nothing to do with doctors, nothing to do with my parents, nothing to do with the government, nothing to do with the fashion industry. This is really between me and my body and Creator and the ancestors, right? This is a very culturally specific view, right? Not everyone is going to have this view. I'm just explaining how I'm seeing it. Body sovereignty is my survivance and exists outside of colonial understanding and imagining, right? I want to try to find a space as much as possible outside of colonization and colonial white supremacy bullshit. Right? I want to find as much time outside of that as I possibly can. This is timeless, it's healing, it's sacred, and it's action based. My ancestors were like, you can't just think and philosophize about this. That's fine. You actually have to create action. You have to do, which means sharing with people. I'm going to talk in just a moment about my health advocacy plan and things like that, and share how I came up with it and why I have it. The other aspect of my body sovereignty projects is there's 3 kind of areas of it that are interconnected. One is my relationship with food, right? Which has been very difficult, very traumatic, right? From having dieting forced upon me, which I just want to be clear that dieting in childhood is abusive. I just want to put that out there. I've heard that from a few people, but I think we need to be as honest as possible about that. Is that it's abusive? Not, but I want to be really clear that my parents were trying to do the best they could for me. And they were listening to what doctors had to say. So that being said, the second part is coming back physically to my body through joyful movement, and things, doing activities and movement that feels good to me. Like I love swimming, water walking. I love going on short walks using my walker with my dog, and things like that. So it can also be helpful for thinking about movement. What did I enjoy doing as a child? And Sonia Renee Taylor talks about that in her book as well. I can't remember the name of her book at the moment. Maybe someone can put it in the chat. But she also talks about thinking back to our childhood about movement and what felt good, what felt liberating and exciting. And then the third aspect is healing from sexual trauma and from sexual abuse. And I don't really talk about that publicly. That's really a kind of a therapy aspect of this work. But I will say that EMDR has been a huge help and treatment to me, both for eating disorder recovery and from sexual trauma, and things like that. So eye movement, reprocessing, and eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. I think that's the name of it. It's a horrible name for a therapy, but it's really, really good if that's something that works for you. So, I just went through the 3 parts. So these are the 3 parts of my body sovereignty project. So let's talk about healthcare navigation. I topping my primary care physician. So as I was kind of thinking about navigating health systems, when I was in graduate school, I got sick. I got necrotizing fasciitis, which is flesh-eating bacteria in my leg. And so I had to have 2 surgeries within 24 hours. And then the year after that, I was in the hospital on and off every couple of months with cellulitis and other things. And so I was having to be in the hospital a lot, dealing with all different kinds of medical providers and specialists. And I thought, how do I help myself navigate these systems better? And I had a particularly really bad experience in the wound care burn unit at Emmanuel Hospital in Portland. And there was, I think, 5 to 6, there might have been a little bit more, things that were said to me and things that were done to me that were traumatizing, that I actually have had to do EMDR to sort of process in a 1.5, I think it was maybe a 1.5 hour appointment. And it was during that and afterwards that I was like, I have got to do something for myself because I do not want to keep experiencing this, and nor should I need to. So I thought about, what are some areas of my life that I feel really empowered? And one of those areas is in queer community, right? I feel very empowered by queer community in a lot of ways. I feel very empowered by Indigenous community as well. But specifically around queer community and sexuality, like I'm a boss ass bitch top, right? So that's what comes natural to me. That's what I like. And so I thought, could I bring topping into navigating healthcare systems? Like, is that like inappropriate? Like that felt very wild to me, right? And I thought, no, I think I could do that. I have to be very subtle about it, but I think I should take that assertiveness that I feel, the comfort that I feel in my body for letting people know how I want to be touched, when I want to be touched, what I want to do, telling someone else what to do, and that consent-based process. And I'm like, how do I sort of move that into helping me create my own safer space? Because I am not able to rely on any of these medical providers or systems to do trauma-informed practice, which is reducing re-traumatization and harm reduction. Like maybe some of them are doing that, but for the most part, it's not happening. So that means I need to do that for myself. So one of the things that I came up with is this document, and I'm going to show it to you in a moment, that I give to all the medical providers and allied health folks that I have worked with, to help give them very specific boundaries and information that I want them to know, so that when they're working with me, they don't cross my boundaries. And if they do, they're very clear on what I'm going to do about it. And so that has felt very empowering to me. So when I'm thinking about, topping my primary care physician, making healthcare my bitch, I want to think about making it my own and remember that I'm the center of it, right? Not that I have this big ego about myself, but when it comes to my body sovereignty, that's my responsibility, right? The creator's given me to not take care of my body because someone says I need to, or because of that healthist garbage of like, you're the individual and it's your responsibility. And if you're not perfectly healthy, there's something wrong with you. Not that ableist garbage, but that I want to connect with the values and understandings of my ancestors and my culture, right? And that feels empowering to me and not disempowering. So I want to make sure that I understand that I'm the center of this, which means I choose what I do. I choose medication. I decide whether I want to be weighed or not during a visit, which I don't, because I find it really triggering and they don't need that information all the time. So I'm at the center of this, not the medical provider, right? Not the medical system. So I try to remember that as I'm navigating through. So in the doctor's office, I have to create a psychologically and emotionally safer space for myself, right? Because I can't rely on them to do it for me. And I said safer, not absolutely safe, because that's not really possible, right? So I'm thinking about, what do I need to do for my own harm reduction? And in trauma-informed care, one of the things we talk about is prediction and prevention. So predicting, what are the things that make me feel anxious, scared, that often happen, that doctors do to me, and how do I mitigate that? How do I reduce that from happening? So I know that I hate being weighed. It's really triggering to me, the whole entire process of it. And so therefore I cut it out unless I need it for if you're specifically on a medication, or if they need to do a procedure or some kind of equipment like a CT scan. There's like a body size limit, right? So there's certain things like that where I might need to be weighed, but otherwise I don't do it. And if anybody says anything to me, I say, no, I'm not interested. You don't need to know my body weight right now. I've had very few people have an issue with it. Most providers and their medical assistants are aware that people refuse to do that. So that's one example of how I've completely, like, how I've reduced harm for myself, is that I don't get weighed, right? And I don't really care about their feelings about it. I don't care about their issues with how they need to do this for their insurance. They need to figure it out. It's their job, not mine. So this is on a document, that Isabella and I created for you all, that has information that we're going to give you and resources and things like that. So I'm not going to go a lot into this, but I use this slide a lot when I'm teaching trauma-informed practice. Creating a safer context or safer environment. These are some of the elements that are really important for us to have, right? Trustworthiness, clear and consistent boundaries, consent and choice. How do we restore power, and how do we promote self-worth, right? So these are really important elements that I used in my document. So this is what my document looks like. It's very graphic. I mean like graphic design. I chose this layout because this is what I want. If you want to have a plan, it doesn't need to look like this. This is just me being creative. So you want to be on Team Shilo. Here's a photo of me, right? This is how I want you to see me, right? I want you to know my pronouns. I want you to know my identities. I want you to know some of the things about my childhood, right? I want you to know nomenclature. I want you to use the word belly. Don't use the word panis with me. I have actually a traumatic experience, the one I mentioned at wound care about that word. So don't use that. Don't use the O words. I don't want to hear those out of your mouth. Right? I would prefer to be called fat. If you can't say the F word, then say person of size. Right? The majority of this document is bullet points of how you can support my health and wellness, right? Here, they're bullet points, but they're like the lightning bolts because that's me. So these are very specifically worded ways that I want medical professionals to treat me. So I'm only going to read one of them, but this is in that document. Hopefully someone put the link in the chat for you. So I'll only read one of these just to kind of give you an idea. So what I want the physician to know, understand that my ultimate goal for my health and wellness is to radically accept the body I have been gifted from Creator and as it is now, right? And to respect the journey I've been on in this body. Out of that foundation and framework of acceptance and respect comes the strength and focus to make changes in behavior, thoughts, and attitude. I will not continue to see myself and my body in a deficit model framework, but will utilize my strengths, talents, and other resources to leverage the changes I would like to make. Whether those be physical, emotional, psychological, or spiritual. Understand that I am the expert of my own body and will make the final decisions about any surgeries, procedures, interventions, and conversations about my own body, health, and wellness. That's a really big boundary for that medical provider to know. This is where you stand. You are not the center of this. I am. This is like a constellation of support. So there's me, and then there's a provider, like a medical provider. Then there's maybe my therapist, dietitian, like whoever. I have a really rad dietitian. So again, making it very clear to them, these are my boundaries, clear and consistent boundaries. I put a little information in here about eating disorders, and a picture of me as a child. That was just something that I wanted them to see. And then on the last 2 pages, I put a Instagram post describing how in the past I've felt about my body, like being a monster. And I want them to have that visceral knowledge of how I've felt about myself in the past. A little blurb about my sovereignty project, and then a list of skills, talents, and resources. I want them to know specific things about me so that when we're interacting, they're aware that I'm really good at problem solving. I'm really interested in learning about my body in a positive way. I run a successful business, right? Whatever it is that I kind of want them to know to help them see me as more of a human, but also know how I learn, how I think, what is important to me. So, and then who's on my team? So, I'm going to wrap this up. Again, this slide is in that Google Doc for you to look at. And I would say one kind of way to think about or to start thinking about this like body autonomy, and if you want to make a plan like this for yourself, is to think about what does body autonomy mean to me, right? You heard what it means to me. It can be completely different for you. And there's some other questions around that in the document. And I think that piece around body autonomy really bridges well with Isabella's work and the information that Isabella is going to share with you as well. So take it away, Isabella. Thank you all so much.
Thank you so much, Shilo. Lots of crossover. I'm really excited. So give me 1 sec and I will share my screen. Okay, so a few of you may have seen some of my work through Instagram and obviously in the beautiful bios. Mine's not nearly as like catchy as Shilo's. I need to have Simon write mine, so stale comparatively. So this is DeathFat. This is my theological project, and it's also a practical project. And that's kind of what I'm going to really focus on today is how this impacts you potentially as fat people or as fat allies who love fat people and may need to integrate some of this into your end of life planning. So first, I want to take just a quick moment to shout out Blanche Moses, who is a huge inspiration for this work. And I encourage you all and invite you all to think of the fat people in your life who you love, or fat people in your life who you've lost, and just hold them dear and kind of imagine better outcomes, futures, and better funerals for them. So Blanche died in 1883, just shy of her 17th birthday. When I started this project, I was learning a lot about her and read some kind of 1800s New York Times articles about her funeral, and they were all focused on the job of the undertaker and how much labor and materials and time it went into care for her, and very little of it focused on this young girl, the young woman who lost her life. So Blanche is dear with me. Shilo, excuse me, not Shilo. Tigress mentioned a few things about me. These are where you can find me on social, or you can email me if you have additional questions. Like Shilo mentioned, we are trying to move relatively quickly, so we have time for questions and breakout rooms. So if you have anything that goes unanswered, throw it in the Google Doc, or you can email me, DM me after the event. So quickly, for those of you who don't know, a doula or a death worker is someone who provides companionship, comfort, guidance, resources, education to anyone kind of facing the end of their life. This can happen at a variety of times. It could be as simple as what we're doing now, which may be not relevant to anyone in an imminent sense, but like you're in the process of contemplating the end of your life and thinking about what your wishes are or how to better advocate for yourself. Or, as Shilo said, other ways to kind of practice body sovereignty and autonomy. And one of those ways is through a really radical relationship with death. And so doulas can start with this. They can help with kind of guidance and contemplation. They can come in when you are diagnosed with a life-changing illness, a terminal diagnosis, or family can even bring you in if a loved one is imminently going to die, or they want to deal with grief after the fact. And then death workers more broadly are anyone who kind of works with death. So doulas, chaplains, morticians, funeral home directors, so on and so forth. So the DeathFat commitments that I hold, and I'll speak about DeathFat in a second, the kind of specifics of that term in theology, are first and foremost spiritually and materially improving death care for fat people. So one of the through lines that Shilo and I identified when we met to kind of talk about this event were that both of our projects are really committed to improving the conditions for each individual person on this micro level. And hopefully that will have a wider impact to change the relationship doctors, death workers have with fat people. And then, of course, the secondary commitment is continuing education and training. So the work that I'm doing here today. And then this third and broader commitment to fat liberation, which is something that I try to embody in my work and how I live my life. So DeathFat, this is probably a term that many fat people are familiar with, but I just wanted to throw this up there in case it wasn't. But DeathFat kind of came out of a term that Leslie Kinzel, who wrote a blog, To Hold Cakes, wrote this term as a joke. And this is a quote directly from Leslie. It's highlighting that morbid obesity is a hilariously overwrought turn of phrase, particularly given the simple reality that not everyone who falls under the category is in imminent danger or even long-term danger of death by fat. And that's absolutely true. And I think that we face a ton of medical stigma and discrimination as fat people. And also, I think there's this really kind of generative space here to think about instead of just always advocating against any health implications of fatness, to totally kind of dismantle our ideas of health and to think about, okay, even if fatness is impacting health or changing the way our bodies move, so what? So how does that impact our relationship to our bodies, to living full and pleasurable lives, and to dignified deaths? So my purpose was kind of taking this word and subverting it yet again to say, let's take this joke that Leslie highlights to its ultimate end and see how fatness and death are connected. So death fat as a theological principle envisions new theologies and practices of death care physically and spiritually that center fat bodies. Integrating death fat into our ways of being and working is to ask how fat bodies are informed in relation to power, access, and stigma, and how we as fat people and or death workers can better support fat funerals and fat futurals at death and beyond. And so as an end-of-life principle, this project is dependent on embracing, as I mentioned, this kind of idea of care and precarity. And it asks us to abandon this false sense that bodies are moral or healthy in a way that will ever totally preclude them from vulnerability. And fat people, trans people, people of color who are subject to violence and danger in very different ways than perhaps more like normative bodies or races, can have to contemplate death in a very different and sometimes much more familiar way, especially if you are a fat person who is navigating, as Shilo talked about so beautifully, healthcare systems which are not designed to support and respond to your needs. And these kind of leak out into even our death care. And so just quickly, to kind of also demonstrate some of these like through lines between death care and healthcare. I won't go through all of these in detail, but these are just a few stats that talk about how important healthcare is when we get to end of life, because so much of this this lack of preparation of care, of availability in fat-friendly healthcare impacts long-term mortality outcomes and ultimately impacts death care. So these are just a few statistics that I pulled that are pretty common that talk about how fat people are impacted by these kind of failures of healthcare. And some of these resources I have if you have more questions about them. And so I mentioned this to demonstrate the scope of the stigma fat people experience regarding their bodies and health. The stigma that in many cases limits fat people's ability to seek medical care and impacts the quality of the care received. This stigma manifests in a variety of ways. And one of those ways is what's really informing the theological work that I'm doing. And that's kind of what I'm doing through my divinity school graduate degree, to kind of think about how to provide spiritual care and counseling in a kind of a religious or interfaith way, but to think about how fat people who have maybe are receiving a terminal diagnosis for a condition that is often linked to fat, or a condition that maybe would not have developed to the stage it's in or to a terminal stage had they had increased access to medical care or better doctors and better medical advocacy. And so that changes the relationship that people are going to have with their deaths, particularly if they're told that they're responsible for them. So I really want to improve and expand and honestly generate a theological approach which takes this into consideration, holds it very, very closely, and is completely committed to finding out what those pain points are and addressing them in collaboration with fat people. And right now, honestly, I'm not sure how familiar you all as an audience are with death work or with spiritual care and counseling. There is absolutely the most kind of minimal amount of resources out there specifically guiding death workers, chaplains, spiritual care providers in how to address the unique needs of fat people, particularly when you have other intersections and identities, disability, race, gender, all of those things, which complicate people's relationship to their body and to their health and death. And so this is all really relevant to how fat people might approach and should consider approaching their end-of-life planning. And so that's kind of what I'll speak about today. So I'm sorry if I went very quickly through the kind of academic and theological stuff. I'm around to talk about it, and Shilo and I have even discussed, how to grow this kind of project in the future. So we'll definitely have more information available for you. But it's relevant to how you actually approach the very practical and material end-of-life planning. And so we'll kind of get into that. A lot of you may be familiar with Ash and her work with the Fat Lip podcast. If you search death fat or fat death, this is one of the very few resources that will pop up, which is a great podcast that she did, which talks explicitly about kind of the lack of research available, and then also starts to explore some of the options for death planning. So she quotes something I think a lot of fat people will resonate with, which is, the outside world already tells us so often that we're doomed to die. And it's also just really tough to think about and talk about, and the information just isn't out there and readily available. Even in death, fat people experience barriers to accessibility, and those barriers increase the fatter you are. And so she hints on later in the quote that so many fat people are experiencing that through healthcare discrimination. We're experiencing that in the media, a lot of kind of fear mongering about our bodies and what that means for our long-term mortality. And yet these industries, which should be kind of meeting the need, fail to do so. And so one of those commitments Death Fat is really trying to materially provide better resources and education for fat people, and ultimately encourage other death workers to make their practices more accessible for fat people. So some considerations before we kind of get into the actual death planning documents, which actually fit beautifully with the documents Shilo shared. And you can even include elements of your death plan in your health document. And if you are at the point where you are ready to actually create a death plan or create an advanced healthcare directive, you can make sure that's included in your documentation that you share with your doctors and medical providers. So just a couple kind of like relevant information for fat people who are eventually going to die, which is all of us. The average funeral cost in the US is about $7,000 to $8,000. That is not inclusive of a vault. So that's a really important number. And I have another slide that'll discuss that. This can get up to 50% more expensive due to transportation costs, to custom or XL caskets, and additional plot costs. Sometimes a traditional burial will require you to buy a secondary plot, or sometimes half plots are available, but not always. Crematoriums can charge more for people over 300 pounds, and they usually up the charge at every additional 100 pounds. I've called many funeral homes to crematoriums in the Los Angeles area. And part of my project longer term is to build out essentially a kind of very basic resource list of accessible funeral homes, morticians, crematoriums in the United States. So I've started that with my internship in LA. And basically 500 pounds was the upper limit. So you'd have to work with someone, and that's the beauty of a doula, they can help to facilitate this, to identify a facility with an XL machine if you're above that weight limit or certain measurements and dimensions. One recommendation that I go very, very hard for is green burial. And that's something that I want for my own burial, because it is essentially a hole in the ground. It can be built to account for any body size, and you don't need a casket. You can do a woven casket, which there's some really great organizations. If you're interested in kind of weaving your own casket, you can do just a shroud. So there's lots of options that can reduce costs. I'm also a huge advocate for home funerals. I don't discuss it as much in this at all, actually, in this presentation, but there's a lot of information from morticians behind the scenes who talk about the kind of absolutely abhorrent treatment of fat bodies when there aren't family members or doulas or social workers kind of watching closely. And so one way to ensure that the body is always treated with dignity and respect is a home funeral. This can also reduce costs. You don't need embalming. There's a lot of measures to keep a body cool. There's a ton of resources. You can make sure that the family is there, can spend time with the body, and can celebrate with a lot of dignity and, as we've talked about, with autonomy and sovereignty, really, really exercise your specific wishes. This also limits transportation costs. This is available in most states. Some states do require that you have a funeral director involved with the process, but not all. So I include a bunch of resources. So if you're interested in that, you can look up for your specific states and include it in your death plan. Then there's also some more kind of new disposition methods, which are aquamation, which is alkaline hydrolysis, which is essentially a kind of almost like chemical bath, which kind of breaks down the body, and you're left with a similar like kind of ashes or a sediment remains. And but those have weight capacities, and they are not as common, though they are definitely gaining momentum and popularity. And then human composting is legal in a small number of states. Oregon, Washington, a few other states have cleared it, but in Washington, there's two very prominent locations which do accept, people from other states. You just have to consider transportation costs. And again, they have weight limits of about 500 pounds, though I do believe there's been some discussion about how to increase that, or kind of long-term looking at increasing the weight limit. So those are kind of the most common options. And like I mentioned very quickly, here's just some information about the cost. So like this is the median cost of a funeral with a viewing. If you add the vaults in, it goes up substantially. And as you can see, like every other industry, it's subject to inflation and change. So these are really important considerations as you think about your end of life planning, making sure that you have the financial resources and that your loved ones know your wishes and that you can plan to the best extent possible in advance. And so to talk into actual end of life planning, a few things which I kind of encourage you to think about today would be the death plan. So the death plan is an informal document or to give to loved ones or medical teams. The healthcare proxy is the person or the people that you trust to make medical decisions if you cannot for yourself. So this may also be heard as a medical power of attorney, healthcare power of attorney, healthcare agent, healthcare surrogate. So a lot of different words. This person is able to make decisions if you are incapacitated. You will identify this person in your advanced directive or living will form. And as you will also kind of identify care treatments in that form. So you'll also hear advanced healthcare directive, personal wish statement. And then finally, a MOLST POLST. This is also a DNR, which is a doctor's order. So we're not going to discuss that as much today because that is a document that you would get in conjunction with your medical team if you did not want to continue any life-saving care. So death planning, like I mentioned, it's different from the POLST or the Advanced Healthcare Directive. It's a personalized plan regarding how you want to approach your own death. And so that's one of the things that Shilo and I really wanted to highlight is that these are both of these documents, and this plan is just another way to have some control and agency over what happens to you and to make sure that the people that are on your team, whether your medical team, your loved ones, your care team more generally, that they know exactly what you want and that to the best and extent possible, they can execute that on your behalf. This also allows the people that you love and who love you when you pass or your death is close to be able to have quality time thinking about you and their love for you and not be stressing over the logistics. This basically serves as this roadmap. So death planning questions. So this is also in the document that we shared. And so you can kind of see these questions here. I invite you to read them, to reflect about them. I know Shilo mentioned weight, and typically I agree. I never get weighed when I go to the doctor. I don't think it's a relevant number for most of the things that I'm doing. It is important, however, when you are death planning to have an idea of what you weigh. Of course, obviously weight fluctuates, so it may not be the same number. You don't have to update the form every time you do a weigh-in. But I having a general idea, particularly if you're on those upper limits, just helps to kind of think about what your plan can be and what is possible to you. That also just impacts the cost and is a really totally morally neutral thing. You just need to know what you weigh to make sure that you can plan correctly. And this is also it gives you the opportunity to kind of think about, like, a lot of people think there's only traditional burial or cremation. They don't know about other options. There are even more options than what I talked about. Is there something that you would love that you have no clue is possible? That's a really good idea to kind of think about and see what's available. Who do you trust to execute your wishes and advocate for you? This doesn't have to be family or partners. This can be friends or other people. Do you want to be buried in a specific place or scattered? Are there legacy projects that feel important to you? How is this going to impact your decision? So this is kind of the first step to start thinking about the end of your life and how you want to plan for it, and hopefully take a lot of the stress out of what is like an already stressful process and allow you to think just about enjoying the time that you have with the people you love. So we're going to talk a little bit about the Advanced Healthcare Directive. In the document I shared that Shilo and I provided resources in, there is information and like a sample little plan that you can follow for a healthcare plan, or excuse me, a death plan. So you'll have lots of opportunities to kind of review that information. So an Advanced Healthcare Directive, the document created to support the dying person's wish as it pertains to their own quality of life. Like I mentioned, it's different than a DNR, so it's not a doctor's order. I provided a ton of resources. There's ones that I really, really like. There's a organization called Join Cake, which has it all state by state and allows for you to kind of fill out a form. It's a lot more intuitive and user friendly. There's also like AARP has every advanced healthcare directive by state. It's a handful of places that will do it. Let me see. And so we'll just go over this one kind of very quickly so you can see a document. This is a advanced healthcare directive for California. So you can kind of get a review, a refresher, a review of what it means to fill out these forms. They are state by state. So you do need to make sure you fill out for your individual state. It will also give you some instructions as to who can be a witness, if you need to have it notarized, or if witnesses' signatures are enough. After COVID, there actually has been a push for some digital signatures. So if you can use like Adobe or DocuSign or things like that, so you might not even need to print it. But again, this is state by state. So like Tigress said, I am not a lawyer. You do need to look for your state and make sure that you complete your forms correctly. So this is essentially, right, like I said, they can give you an idea of who the witnesses can be. Sometimes those people cannot be people who would benefit from your death financially or otherwise. And then in California, you can see one of these people has to be related to you by blood, but the other people do not. And there's just more instructions on that. As you move down, you can see change your mind. This is something that you can always like destroy. You can make a new one. They will always refer to the most what am I trying to say? The most recent copy. So you don't have to, you're not bound to copies that were before, but if every time you do update it, or every time there's a big life event that warrants updating the form, I would update and make sure that that's the document that your doctors and loved ones have. So if you get into the actual document, it just explains it very, very clearly what this is. And then it kind of gives you the options. So first, and this is by far, and this is kind of what I wanted to work through the form, this is the most important part that you will do, is assigning your power of attorney. Essentially, everything else doesn't really matter if the people who you've designated as your powers of attorney are not going to advocate for you and are not equipped to do that. So the people that you pick are incredibly important because what they say essentially goes in the case that you're incapacitated. So I would think very carefully about that, have conversations, think about the people who are going to best understand. I think Shilo mentioned this with another two-spirit auntie, that there's someone who recognizes their different identities, who knows what they want, who's willing to advocate. And so maybe that isn't your partner. Maybe that isn't your mom or your best friend. Maybe it's your brother who you aren't best friends with, but will absolutely exercise your wishes. So it's a big kind of thought about body sovereignty and body autonomy, because you need someone who is going to do what you want, regardless of what they may think is right or correct. So you'll get through this agent, and you can also specify what they can do. So this document gives you a ton of control over your end of life planning. You can also say when it becomes effective, right? So you can check that box if you are going into a surgery or things like that. You can also think about, how does this impact organ donation? Are there things that you don't want? The beauty of these forms is that they are really designed for you to say what you want or don't want to happen. And as long as your powers of attorney are going to follow as closely as possible, then your wishes will be fulfilled. And that's a really beautiful thing, that some of this advanced planning, which I know is not sexy and I know is not fun, and I know can be really emotionally intense for a lot of people, but ultimately it's a way to advocate for yourself and for your loved ones, that they have a better experience of your death as well. So you'll see this kind of just goes on, and it talks about different witnesses. It has to be signed by a notary, not in California. So that here it gives you an option, but some states do require a notary. And then you just fill it out and complete it. So it's a very simple form. It looks like a lot of documents, but most of that is just directions, and it's something that you can complete and get signed and throw into your planning and your death care and your healthcare kit, like Shilo mentioned. Okay. And we'll have time for some questions. I know that's a lot of information. And so then this is a pulse and DNR, which is if you ever are diagnosed with a terminal illness, or you are imminently at the end of your life, a pulse and DNR is the document that your physician would sign. And of course, in communication with you and collaboration with you, you can decide what you would want, whether it's full treatment, so essentially any means necessary for something that isn't deemed medically futile, selective treatment, so certain things, or then no treatment and just comfort-focused treatment, so just kind of managing pain and discomfort. So this is totally, again, up to you, and a way to really think about what you want. An important consideration for fat people is, unfortunately, we are working against a system that may not organically do everything available to prolong our lives. So that's something you might want to think about as you fill out these forms. Do you want to ask the doctors to do as much as possible, knowing that they may not have exhausted all options that they might have for somebody else? So that's a certain consideration. That shouldn't impact what you want to do ultimately, but it's something to kind of think about as we move through death fat. And that's one of my principles too, is how do we need to shift our normal models to include fat people? And these will always be like bright colored forms. They'll be like bright neon. So you'll always know, it won't ever get confused with your advanced healthcare directive. It'll always be like a very bright form and not typically relevant until you are imminently looking at the end of your life. And so those are the forms, and I can show you other things, but I know we have breakout rooms and questions. So I just want to talk about the kind of final part of this project, which is fat futures. And so I really loved this graphic the Fat Sex Therapist shared on their Instagram pretty recently, because I think it asks a really great question about how these fears of death and fatness and living fully while fat sever the mind-body connection. We become disembodied and afraid. How can we come back home? So a framework like Death Fat addresses these cycles of shame and stigma to help us rebuild mind-body connections, advocate for more accessible options, tell new stories about fat people, demoralize bodies, and imagine new futures full of good lives and deaths. So the commitment is to letting the body be in both life and death, and it's working towards fat futures. And this is my final little quote, which I love, which is the hard-won realization that one can live as a fat subject is nothing more than transformative. So thank you guys so much.
So I think at this point, we wanted to do breakouts for 15 minutes, Isabella. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think we have a little bit of time, so we'll short our Q&A, but I think it's worth doing.
Yeah, and I think, we might be able to go a little bit over as well, but I think so the point of having you all get into small groups is to just sort of start the conversation about some of these topics. And so, Tigress, I didn't know if you want to walk folks through how the groups are going to work, or if you want me to do that.
Oh, sure, I can do that. I also just want to take a moment to recognize our board member, Trevor Keyson, who has led our work at NAAFA in putting together resources about death planning for fat people, and who brought us to Isabella. We already knew Shilo through some previous work and through community, but Trevor's worked really, really hard on this project and really helped us prioritize this as an organization and as a community. So I just want to give that shout out. I think Trevor's here. If you end up in a breakout room with Trevor, treat Trevor like Simon treated Shilo. Okay, so Julian is going to open up some breakout rooms. We're going to have one room for people who want to focus on the kind of document that Shilo has, one room for people who want to focus on the kind of document that and questions that Isabella has been talking about, and then one room for people who don't mind talking about either of those things. If you and you will opt yourself into those rooms, but if the rooms are too overbalanced, we may ask some of you to move, or move some of you that we know around a little bit, just so we don't have a bajillion people in one room and two people in another room. We also will, the ASL interpreters will be in the people who want to talk about either of the things room. So if you need them, please make sure that you opt into that room. Julianne, I think you can go ahead and open the breakout rooms. And then if anybody has any questions, you can DM me or you can DM Julianne. So thank you everyone for your energy in the breakout rooms. And we are going to go ahead and wrap up the recorded portion of the webinar now. I'm going to ask you, Shilo and Isabel, just to tell folks one more time where they can find you if they want to be in touch with you. Shilo, would you go first?
Sure. I have a really cool new website, www.shilogeorge.com. And I do have social media. I'm not so much on it all the time, but Instagram at Shilo George or at LKT_consulting. And those are some ways that you can find me. So thank you.
Great. And Shilo, do you have any final thought that you want to share before we wrap up the recording?
You are a badass. You're amazing. Your body matters. It's sacred. It's powerful, and you have the agency to do what you want or not with your body and let people know about that. So go for it.
Thanks, Shilo. Isabella, will you tell folks where to find you, and then any final thought that you have?
Yes, that was so beautiful, Shilo. You can find me at Death Fat Doula on Instagram. And then you can see my website, which I'll just throw in here, deathfatdoula.com. And then you can email me at my name, Isabella at deathfatdoula.com. So you can contact me there. You can also find my personal, which is not it's where I'm sort of kind of blending the advocacy stuff, which is IsabellaRoseCarr.com. So you can find me all over. And yeah, I mean, Shilo, what you said was so beautiful. I don't even think I have anything to top it, but just that you absolutely do deserve to care for your body, to have others care for your body. And unfortunately, being a fat person means that sometimes you have to really fight for it, but you have teams and care and love and support in NAAFA, and people like me and Shilo who do everything in our power to help you fight for what you want and what you deserve. Mwah.
Thank you both. I'd like to thank once again our friends at Pro Bono ASL. Today we were supported by David and Selena. They are also on social media at Pro Bono ASL, and their website is probonoasl.com. Please support their important work. And once again, I want to thank all of the folks who contribute to NAAFA and allow us to provide these kinds of webinars free to the public. If you would like to support that effort, please visit NAAFA.org/give and contribute something today to help us keep all of our hardworking folks working at it. And finally, once again, we just want to wish everyone a happy Fat Liberation Month. We've still got several more virtual events to go. There's also information about the Campaign for Size Freedom at our website, which is our effort to work towards supporting legislation that helps protect us against size discrimination. We will be joined at one of our virtual events from the folks at Dove who are supporting us in that work. So please do sign up and join us for that event so you can hear more from them about why they have signed on to help. And we have a few more other fun and educational virtual events still to go in August. So please join us. Thank you for being here with us today, everyone. We'll see you next time. Take care.